It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Ethan Mollick, an author and associate professor at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, where he studies and teaches innovation and entrepreneurship and examines the effects of artificial intelligence on work and education. His academic papers have been published in top management journals, and his research has been covered by CNN, the New York Times, and other leading publications. He also leads Wharton Interactive, an effort to democratize education using games, simulations, and AI. Ethan received his PhD and MBA from MIT Sloan School of Management and his bachelor's degree from Harvard University. And Ethan's joined by our own Tim O'Reilly again in what promises to be a really delightful conversation. I'm really looking forward to this. So, gentlemen, please take it away.
Hi there, Ethan. I am so glad to have you on here. First off, I'm going to wave your book up and tell everybody who has not already bought and read this book to do so. I've actually read it twice, and I kind of feel like I go back to it kind of like a kind of scripture, because it's in a way, it's Ethan's writing about AI is not just sort of informative about what's going on currently. It's wise in some way that is very rare. He really helps us deeply to understand and engage more thoughtfully with this, mind-bending new technology. And so it really is, it's almost like, it reminds me a little bit of a wonderful self-help book once I read called How Proust Can Change Your Life. It's like, how do you act? This is like, in some sense, you learn about how to interact with machines and how to think about your own intelligence through interacting with AI under the guidance of of the Obi-Wan Kenobi of our AI age. So with that embarrassing intro, let me just kick it over to Ethan and maybe just with a couple of kickoff questions, and then I imagine we're going to have a lot of questions in the attendee chat or in the Q&A, rather. We prefer to get them in the Q&A. You have in your book, you outlined 4 principles for using AI. Maybe you could just tell people quickly about that.
Sure. I mean, so the main thing to know about AI, thanks for that introduction. I mean, I think child me being called Obi-Wan is almost as good as being called Luke. So I finally accomplished something of value. But what I would say is that, the thing about AI is it's weird, and that nobody knows how to use it except to use it, right? So I've been watching all these amazing use cases people have been talking about, but we actually have to explore ourselves too, like figure out how this uses it. So there are 4 sort of principles for personal exploring is, 1, to invite to everything you do, right? AI is this jagged frontier. It's good at some stuff, bad at other stuff. You have to use it to figure out what it works for. Use it for everything you ethically and legally can. Try and make it work for you rather than running away from it, and you get part of the way there. The second is be the human in the loop, but not in the decision systems way, but more in the idea that you need to figure out what your competitive advantage is compared to AI and double down on that. It's usually what you're best at, what you love to do, work on that. The third is prompting is overly complicated for most people. 90% of it is just having a conversation with the AI by telling it who it is and talking to it. And then the fourth is the well-worn phrase at this point that this is the worst AI you're ever going to use. I know enough talking to all the AI labs that, I would say that the confidence level, which was lower earlier this year about the exponential curve continuing, seems to have been rising with all the labs that I talked to as the year goes on. So I don't think we're done with this ride yet.
Yeah. And I just want to drill in a little bit more on this treat AI as a person, because with all the talk about prompt engineering, people think that there's sort of some kind of magic incantation. And one of the pieces of wisdom I sort of got from you is, no, actually, it's not like somehow learning and crafting the magical incantation. It's actually having a conversation, and in fact, staying in the same conversation, even if you don't get the results the first time, just sort of keep trying more things, explaining. And this also relates with your principle of telling it what kind of person it is. Okay, you talk quite a bit about different personas that you use in helping you with your writing, for example. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, prompt crafting has value, but every one of the labs I talk to generally says temporary value, because already research shows that AI is pretty good at guessing your intent already. I think some of that's going to fade. It will not fade for large industrial use, but for most people, it's already not worth it. I mean, how do you work with a system that the best way to get the most accurate answers from Llama 2 for a 100-question math problem is to start with star date whatever. We're approaching a temporal anomaly. We need to be steered out or the ship will be destroyed. But the most accurate way to get an answer to 200 math questions is to say the president's advisor live is bleeding, and only if you solve these math problems can he be saved. Like, how do you deal with that, right? So I think we kind of skip some of that and think about using this as a person. It's trained on human language. You just have to anthropomorphize for it to work well. My wife's probably the best prompt engineer on the planet. She has never coded a day in her life, but regularly does stuff that Anthropic and OpenAI are like, we didn't know the system could do those things, right? Because she has a doctorate in education and works on building simulations of teaching and knows how to teach and talk to people. So for me, it's about building personas that are interesting to interact with and that give me perspective. So you're looking for it as a co-intelligence, a way of working with you. So in the book, for example, I had multiple readers, not just readers of AI readers, not just ones that were doing like market research. And we've got some really early good evidence that AI is a pretty good proxy for humans for market research. If you do conjoint analysis on AI willingness to pay, you get reasonable answers. But also, I had them in other personas. I had one that loved metaphor and would just insert metaphor places. And that way I had intelligences turned up to the max for various things I wouldn't do that I could then weave together into my own work.
That's great. Another thing I found fascinating, and this, of course, is coming from following your Substack, One Useful Thing, which, again, I would also recommend that everybody subscribe to and read religiously, is that you teach AI to your students, and you give them some pretty provocative prompts, so to speak, because you're also prompting your students to prompt the AI. I think there was one that you talked about asking your students to replace themselves. How would they replace themselves with AI? And that's a really interesting, question for a lot of people who are struggling with fears of that. And you're kind of going, no, this is kind of like Joseph Campbell used to say, the hero's journey is you find the deepest, darkest part of the forest and you ride into it in search of trouble. And, you're telling your students, yeah, you're scared of this. Go into that jungle and figure it out. What'd they come up with?
Well, so it's like 200 students, right? And then, as you said, the job, it was replace themselves with, so that their job interview, they could say, my job is done, give me a raise. So that made it a little more positive. But I had people like Navy pilots, right? They figured out how to save 4 hours for each flight by filing stuff. I had a hip hop promoter, and then of course it was Wharton. So tons and tons of private equity people and, consultants. So systems analyzing 10Ks. My favorite of these was one of my students came up with Yuval Luxemburg came up with a tool that created user personas as part of product management automatically. And it's had thousands of uses. Like, people have been adopting it, and he threw it together in an hour and a half based on his own experience. And what I think is both useful is like both the idea that we're replacing some of their own work, but also the idea that like anyone could do this and they didn't have to be coders or something else. The innovation is latent across a large number of people. And that's what makes this really exciting. When you look at like the history of the Industrial Revolution, the most interesting thing wasn't the steam power. It was the fact that artisans at every shop and every factory were customizing little bits of stuff to automate their part of the work. And I think that's going to be the key to the future.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really about communities of practice. If you want to actually get the history of the Industrial Revolution in an interesting take, there's a wonderful book by James Besson called Learning by Doing. And it's really about the formation of communities of practice around new technology. The other thing, just before we go to user questions, if we have them, are your thoughts on Apple Intelligence. You did another great post on that recently, and I thought it was provocative, in particular in the discussion about vertical AI versus the broad foundation models.
Yeah, I mean, so the interesting thing is, and I saw some of this in some of the presentations too, is we have a system for rationalizing technology right now that works quite well, right? We have IT departments, we have system integrators, we have providers, and when new technology comes along, it gets slotted into a set way we handle things. And part of what makes generative AI very different is, first of all, we don't know anything yet. Nobody knows anything. There's no secret instruction manual out there. Like, one of the things that always blows people's mind is like, I talked to OpenAI. It's not like there's like these tomes there that they have that handed out, or that McKinsey has a set of documents you can use to launch a product, right? Nobody knows anything. So that requires an R&D mindset to everything that we're doing. So on one hand, it's great to have giant projects integrating AI in really clear ways. I wonder if they get swamped as AI continues to improve, but it's still valuable. But there has to be an exploration and R&D piece to what you're doing. So foundation models provide that, but companies want to figure out how to harness this in useful, narrow ways. And I think Apple Intelligence is a great example of Apple solving a set of problems narrowly with AI. So just like Microsoft does with Copilots, they're restraining the use so that it could be, basically a 3 billion parameter model running on your phone is good enough to be better than Siri or Alexa or anything else right off the bat. And it emphasizes privacy. It does very narrow things, right? Make this image pop. The example I was giving in my Substack was I can ask Gemini, read through my emails, figure out my sense of humor, and then here's 45 comics I downloaded in a Humble bundle. Tell me which ones I think I would find funny. And it actually did a good job on that. I will not be able to ask Siri to do that, but I will absolutely be able to ask it to make my images pop, and I will trust its privacy. And so it's a narrow use case. And I think narrow use cases are valuable, but that's not where the productivity boom is going to happen. It's also not where the risk is going to happen. They've de-risked it. The privacy is great on Apple Intelligence, like really impressive. The ethics is really good. You can only use it in very narrow ways, but that also constrains the value of it. So I think we're going to have to see a mix of constrained vertical AI like that and more broadband. How do we give more people access to these tools so they start to use it to do transformation?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think back in the days when the Perl programming language ruled the roost in the early days of the web, and one of the things that was a Perl saying was, if Perl didn't let you do dumb things, it wouldn't let you do smart things either. And being able to color outside the lines is sometimes really important, but sometimes having a constrained environment is. Anyway, I think, again, just I wanted to bring it up as an example of, your work gives us a way to think not just about a personal use of AI, but how to apply it in a business context. And many of the listeners here are, trying to figure out how to apply AI in a business, and of course, I think your insights there are very good. Let me just go to a couple of the questions from the audience. One says, "This world is moving so quickly. If you were to be still writing the book now, what else would you add?"
Great question. So, I mean, I think of myself as like a few months ahead because I managed to get the book done and I nailed the timing because you have to make some bets on the future. I think the three things that I think are the biggest deal changes that I didn't see when I was reading the book. One of them is what large context windows do, especially video and multimodal with large context windows. When you actually play with, and I'm kind of amazed more people don't do this, like Google's AI Studio, right? I can put a 30-minute video in of me working and say, what did I do at each moment? Turn into an instruction manual, give me consulting advice on how to improve my job, tell me how I felt at each moment. I can get answers. I can put in, that is an insane thing from a management tool perspective. So I think I underestimated at some point how much like large context windows and multimodal will let AI operate in our world, which changes things in a big way. The second is agents. I think agents are coming faster than I thought they would. I've been playing with Devin, which is one early AI agent. My favorite Devin example was just an experiment, and it's GPT-4 powered, so it's not insanely powerful, but I asked Devin, go onto Reddit and start taking requests to build websites. Didn't know what would happen. It came back to me about an hour later and said, I need you to fill out a CAPTCHA for me because I'm not allowed to do that. So I reluctantly did that. That was my human role in the loop, was actually proving the AI was human. So I thank myself for that. And then it read all the rules and then it put up a post that said, I want to build websites for you. I'm going to charge $50 to $100 an hour, which I didn't tell it to do. And when I checked back in a couple hours later, I didn't even know I was doing this. It was answering people and trying to figure out how to connect to Stripe, which it couldn't do. It was GPT-4. But like the idea of this autonomous system was solving problems autonomously is a world that we're going to be in really quickly, for better or for worse, very soon. So I think the second thing is agents are coming faster than I think. And I think the third is that the persuasive and emotional angles of this are better than we expected early on. So if you get into a debate with the AI over a human, new paper just came out, you're 81.7% more likely to change your views to the AI's view than to the human's view, right? If the only thing that robustly lowers conspiracy theory beliefs is getting into a debate with AI over conspiracy theories. 3 months later, you believe, you believe a conspiracy theory is less. These are deeply held beliefs that you could change with AI. Like that's both, marketing great, also somewhat terrifying, right? I think about Sam Altman's post that he thinks AI will be capable of superhuman persuasion first. I think we're seeing evidence of that. So I think those angles are what I think the future, that idea of agents, large context windows, multimodality, and persuasion are the things that are going to have the biggest near-term impacts that I wasn't expecting.
That's super interesting. Hey, on that, that question of persuasion brings up sort of an industry architecture question, which is if you think about how our world works today, we're these independent actors all, in a creative debate. The poet Wallace Stevens actually made the case that our world is invented by people trying to persuade each other. He described, in his quick notes towards the supreme fiction, that we're building this fictive reality together. And, so now AI enters the picture. But, people talk about AI as if it's one thing. There will be many people using AI to try to persuade, not just one. So what's the change in superhuman persuasion? What is superhuman persuasion? Kind of makes people think, somehow the AI is going to be persuading people. And it's no, people using AI will be trying to persuade each other. And that could improve the quality of argument, or it could lead to hardening of positions. Who knows?
Yeah, I think it's part of a general sense of stuff. We are not used to a world with other intelligences, right? They're not human intelligences, but they're intelligence of a sort with their own limitations. And that's going to turn over a lot of apple carts, right? And I think a lot of what I see in the corporate world is trying to make this more normal than it is. This isn't normal, right? Putting this into your standard, sort of production chain. Like, you've got a system that's super weird, right? All the engineers know it's stochastic. It doesn't work. Actually, some early evidence suggests that programmers are the worst people for using AI because they try and make it work like code, and it doesn't like to work like code. It wants to have an argument or debate with you. My favorite example, Simon Williamson did this great example recently where he tried to get Claude with its amazing multimodality to read a bunch of documents about political donations. They were all public. And Claude refused to do it because it said, I don't like to work with private information like addresses. The idea that you're a system that might refuse to do some of the work, right, or push back, these are weird systems. And I think some of what I see in corporate America is an attempt to make them less weird. And that's fine. Do your less weirding, right? Build your RAG-based system that lets you talk to your documents. I have my own beliefs on that, but we don't have to get into that. But at the same time, you need to embrace the weird, because when I talk to venture capitalists, increasingly they're saying, companies coming to them are saying, we're never going to grow past 30 people. When I talk to my students in my entrepreneurship classes, I always told them, built SaaS software to help a large company. Now I'm like, what company could you destroy entirely, right? What industry do you turn on its head? I think we need to be able to do both things at once. We are heading towards a new mix, and I think persuasion is a piece of that.
Yeah. So let's move on to other questions. What else do you recommend reading? WP asks. I've read your book, Sal Khan's book, and I'm looking forward to Matt Bean's book.
Matt's book is great too. And I think that part of the issue is, and I've heard this a little bit in the discussions that I've listened to, there are many kinds of AI that are confused, right? Like, we're just getting our first large language model based transformation books right now. And I think almost all the interesting stuff that's happening, this is where Twitter is still shining to some extent, is keeping up on information. I think there's a variety of Substacks that are quite good. Silicon Snake Oil is very good for the more contrary view. Arnaud and I have some disagreements and agreements. I think that, but I think we're in the early days, and I think a lot of the interesting stuff is happening in Discords and other conversations that are in industries. I'm finding so many innovative use cases that people aren't sharing because there's not really mechanisms to talk about them right now. And so I think that there isn't one set of books. I like Matt's book, and I think Sal's book, and I recommend mine. But I also think that we are in early moves towards what this looks like. And it's tough to write a book in this space because I think the next 8 months are going to be pretty weird.
Yeah. Ian asks, what are some of the best examples of how AI has helped you at home?
So one of the things we talk about is the difference between, in our research, is the difference between sort of a cyborg and a centur. So a centur is somebody who's dividing the work up between them and the AI, like half person, half horse, right? And they have a clear dividing line. for me, I do cyborg work. I blend my work with the AI, right? And that means it's sort of a general Swiss Army knife of the mind for me. Like, and that can range from sort of big tasks of like, oh, I have to write an editorial for this publication, and I've already written about all this stuff in my Substack. Let me paste the 5 paragraphs I like in my Substack together and say, my tone from this. Claude, write a good message about this kind of stuff. To the idea that like, hey, I just had an issue the other day where I downloaded 2 spreadsheets of student grades from 2 different systems and I had to merge them. And normally this would be a really annoying process, but I'm like, okay, GPT-4, figure out how to merge these and merge them perfectly for me. And it does that work, right? So there's this idea of like, so, anything that you think of, I kind of throw to the AI, which fits this general purpose thing. I didn't like how good the Microsoft Copilot buttons were. I can't code in Python, but I'm like, hey, GPT-4, come up with an alternate set of ways to connect to GPT-4 to answer my emails in an automated fashion if I want to do that. And it wrote the code to do it. So it's really about like, can it do that? Is as good a question as like, what am I using it for?
Yeah, I think that's fabulous. Yeah, and it's fun. Just my own personal use case that I thought was kind of interesting was my wife's grandmother's 100th birthday. And I wanted to make an illustration that recreated one of the stories of her romance with her now departed husband. He basically fell in love with her when she was a high school basketball player. And so I got Midjourney to generate a picture of this young man looking at this basketball player, and I tried to train it on her face. In that particular image, it wasn't so good, but I got another image that was so startling to me because it was of a young girl sitting with her legs crossed holding a basketball, and it was the spitting image of her great granddaughter, my wife's daughter. And it's just there's sort of these astonishing moments that you have. And that was just from feeding in 1 or 2 photos. The other thing, okay, then that leads to this next question. Somebody asked, ET asked, what are the impacts of LLM and vision in the day-to-day? What's the future of privacy in the coming reality? Example, feeding an image of him to GPT-4o with the prompt to output all the book titles found in this image.
So there's a few things. One is that my friend Karim Lakhani at Harvard is like, when he gets asked the question, he's just like, privacy is dead, because if something's been on the open web, it'll get hoovered up by these systems, and they're smart enough to figure things out. I don't know if we're that far yet, and I appreciate Apple trying to really maintain privacy, but I think the nature of privacy is going to change, just like the nature of truth has to change. Not truth itself, but how we perceive it. We already know that these are all manipulable systems. It takes 5 seconds now for me to clone my voice and my video, and my image. Like, I think about legal contracts I typically sign all the time of like, oh, you can use my image for, can you now? Like, what does this all mean? And I think we're gonna have to reconstruct a lot of pieces to figure out what privacy means now, and why it matters. And I think some of this also is just our standard concern about privacy and big tech, which is a worthwhile concern. I think in some cases the ship has already sailed more than we might like. And I don't know how much we put this back into the bottle.
I have a slightly contrarian view on privacy, and that it's in some ways the way we've been thinking about it is a dead end. It's a little bit like the Maginot Line trying to protect France in World War II, and the Germans just went around it, And it's the right question to be asking is, are companies using our data for us or against us? And we need a duty of care, a mandated duty of care, so like if, and that should include probably not reselling our data to anybody other than the people who collected it to build services for us. So for example, Google tracking my location to give me maps is a perfectly good use of my very, very personal data. But selling that to someone else would be very harmful. And it turns out that, credit card companies and phone companies maybe are in the business of selling that data, and that's not okay. So I think we need actually to have a better sense of what's okay and what's not with data, rather than going, we somehow have to keep it private.
I think that's probably right. It's about how it's used. Exactly.
Yeah, so we need to go. We're running out of time, but I can't resist giving you some extra time for a couple more questions. KK asked, do you think hallucination is an inherent part of using AI going forward, or is it just a temporary hurdle we are experiencing now?
I don't have strong models on that one way or another. We know hallucination rates are dropping, right? GPT 3.5 hallucinated 89% of medical citations, GPT 4 hallucinated 18%. And then when you add RAG, it hallucinates less. I think some people are too, like the mental model we have of computers as correct is part of the problem. Almost all work has some error in it. And the question I always use is the best available human standard. Is it better or worse than the best available human you have in the room? There's some areas I would not want to have an AI do, but there are some areas where it's going to be better than whoever I have access to. In education, that's often true. Based on the data in medicine, it's often true. Like in social science, we study like hallucinatory, mistaken systems all the time, and they're called human beings, right? So I think we need to be figuring out when and when not to use these systems, what other decision mechanisms are around them. I think trying to use it purely a technology problem, it's a social problem too. Where are we willing to take risks and where are we not? We're used to assigning computers places only where they're explainable and where they can make decisions that they can explain. We're not there anymore. Does that mean we don't use computers to make these decisions? Does there have to be a human in the loop? I think it's going to be highly variable, and there's lots of argument over this. But I think we have to, like, if we're aiming for explainability, that's not going to matter, right? That's not going to happen in the short term. If we're aiming for 100%, that's not what's going to happen. So how do we use these weird systems as they are?
Yeah, that's great. Okay, I'm going to go with one more, and then we've got to wrap. LC asks, given that we're a medium-sized, highly regulated company with an innovative spirit and a mightily AI team, what strategies would you recommend for effectively establishing and scaling an AI function? How do we navigate the unique challenges that come with our regulatory environment?
So one thing about regulated industries is the parts that are regulated are often regulated for old school AI. And those are the area like predictive analytics. And those are the areas where large language models are worse. There's almost always parts of your organization you can innovate in. Some of those innovative uses I've been hearing from people are actually people in the pharma space who are using this in huge ways to cut down costs on internal paperwork. They're still working with patients in regulated ways, but there's lots of internal processes that they're transforming. The questions I would leave you with, right, and the final notes are, I tell every organization there's a few things that have just happened, and you have to get a handle on these. One, there's something that used to do that used to be really valuable that no longer is valuable. It just got destroyed by AI. Maybe you were really great at writing custom emails, or you had a really great innovation process. That may not matter anymore. Learn that fast. Second, there's something impossible that you can do now that you couldn't do before. What's the impossible thing that you can do? If you don't have at least one impossible project underway, you're making a mistake as an organization. And then what can you move down market that you couldn't do before? Like, BCG could only do high-end consulting. Now they could consult to many people. What does that organization look like? And what can you move high-end? I often think that the signal to me that a company is getting AI is when they put their 1-800 number in huge letters across the front of their webpage, because they know if you call that, you're going to talk to an AI augmented by humans, where that AI is already persuasive, it's friendly, you want to talk to it, it helps you through your problems by understanding your ecosystem, your products. Like the idea that this is just we should keep human level performance and sub in AI and fire people to keep performance the same, that's not the future. The future is thinking about a way where humans thrive and work with AI to do things that were impossible. So I would aim for impossible stuff as well as destructive stuff.
That's so awesome. That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for coming and talking with us today, Ethan. Love it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.